So this was an implant case on tooth number 3 that was submitted by a doctor just for review. No particular problems, just wanted us to check his design to make sure it looked good. And it looks great, and I just wanted to make a video of this because it actually presents a very interesting dilemma that I haven't had a chance to discuss yet. So this is actually a perfect case. So let's start just looking at the mill preview. This is how the case was shipped, and when I look at this, it looks very, very good. Everything's smooth, good emergence profile, good margins, no minimal thickness infringements. Everything's fitting in the block. It's very nice because he had such nice thick emergence profile and a deeper implant that the sprue is going below the split line, so we're not going to have any interferences with the sprue affecting the marginal fit of the Emax veneering structure. So everything looks good here. Now if we switch down to the actual crown, we look at that, that looks good as well. So no problems, everything is looking good. So let's go ahead and look at the design. We'll back up to the design phase. This is the crown. You can see the split line here. Let's go down and look at the actual split abutment. Bring that back to the design phase. And again, it looks very, very good. So when I looked at this case, I was like, wow, great job, great design, everything was good. And then I went ahead and I put up his tissue. So I went over to display objects, clicked on the upper gingiva, and I noticed, well, wait a minute here, his margin for his abutment is really far above the tissue. So the first thought that went through my head is, okay, maybe he did not, when he clicked on the scan body in the model step, maybe he did not click on use gingiva mask. So I went back to, the first thing I'm going to do is actually unsplit the case. It'll allow me to go back to the model phase and check where he clicked on the scan body head. So I'll click on the scan body head, and sure enough, he used the gingiva mask, and he actually drew the split line on the tissue. Okay, so when you draw the split line on the tissue, you should really actually have the split line on the tissue. So let's go back to the design phase. Let's go ahead and resplit the crown. And when I click split, actually let me back up here, let me unsplit this and just hit split but not hit apply yet. Okay, so here is, you saw that when we had the tissue, we drew the margin on the tissue using the gingiva mask. So let's go ahead and throw our gingiva up there. And now notice, look where the split line is. It's a little bit above the gingiva here in the lingual, but quite a bit above the gingiva here on the buccal. So we'll go ahead and apply this. And so what gives here? Why did this, when you drew the margin on the actual tissue, why did the split line go above the tissue? Well, in the parameters, you don't have the ability, before you split you have a gingival margin, you don't have the ability to actually make it super gingival anymore, so it's not a parameter issue. So what happens if we go ahead and use our scale tool? We'll bring our occlusal down, make sure we have nice room for the Emax, and then why don't we just go ahead and click off scale whole, and we certainly have the ability to manually bring this margin down to the tissue. Okay, we got a little minimal thickness problem there. That's not a big deal. That's easily solved by just taking care of the margin. Right now we have a millimeter margin. We'll just go back and switch that shoulder width to 600, and I'm sure that's going to take care of that minimal thickness. Sure enough, it did. It went ahead and reset this, so once again, let's go back and scale this down, and we'll click off scale whole, turn on our tissue, and scale this down to the tissue. Okay? So the software has the ability to manually push that down below the tissue, but I will show you what happens when we go into the mill preview. Sure enough, our abutment still looks good. We would have had a little cleaning up to do there, but everything is fitting in the block just fine. But if I go down to the veneering structure or the crown, go to mill, it doesn't fit in the block. In fact, it doesn't even come close to fitting in the block. If we use the distance tool, we roughly got about almost 2.5 millimeters. Now, you're never going to be able to rotate that to fit into the block. So let me tell you what happens here. If if we unsplit the restoration, what the software is doing in these scenarios with really long crowns is when you go ahead and split, even though that marginal line is not down to where the tissue is at, like you previously wanted it to do back in the model phase when you're clicking on the scan body, it actually had to move itself up enough in order for the veneering structure or the final crown to fit into the block. So this was designed correctly by the dentist. If we go ahead and hit apply, even though in this case you're going to have, sometimes you'll get a little white there. If you click on a tool, it goes away. Or excuse me, black. So sometimes you're going to have scenarios where there's just nothing you can do about it here. You're going to have that margin above the level of the tissue, so you're going to have zirconia showing. Probably not a huge issue way in the back here. So you have one or two options. You proceed in this direction here, having some of that zirconia be above the level of the tissue. It has good emergence. The tissue will shrink up nicely. It's just a fine situation. But you cannot bring that down to the level of the tissue, otherwise the crown will not fit into the block because the crown is so long. The other option is you could make the abutment down to the level of the tissue, but then you would have to make a lab fabricated crown in order to fit that in there, or mill something and then stack a layer porcelain on top, which is not a good option. So what this dentist did was correct. It's an interesting case, just in case somebody runs across a scenario like this. The design was done right, so good job.